What's up? Welcome into ESPN FC live here on YouTube alongside Mark Ogden and Stevie Nicol. I'm Dalen Cuff. Great to be with you here. Champions League action. Again, match day 1 for the second set of games starts a little later this afternoon. Ryan O'Hanlon will join us as well to talk about that. Also his power rankings and some conversation around Arsenal and their goalkeeper situation. Interesting to see who Arteta starts here today in this game against PSV Eindhoven. We'll talk about the bigger picture there. But we start, though, guys, with a team that's not in Europe, didn't qualify last year, and sure as hell look like they may not qualify this year either. We'll start with Chelsea and their struggles right now. Pochettino's got a serious problem. 1 win from 5 games, to say the least, and some uninspired performances. As you see, their inability to score goals, last 31 shots, they've not hit the back of the net with Bournemouth this past week, and they were part of the first 0-0 draw of the campaign. Stevie, I'll start with you. Is this about Poch? Is it about the roster? Is it about injuries? What do you make of where Chelsea is right now?
I think
we just lost Stevie. So, Augie, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we know that Pochettino walks into a situation at Chelsea whereby he had a lot of players he didn't want, big holes in the squad that he needed to fill. And I still don't think they filled the main one, which is the centre forward. I think that they're a team that lacks a real goal threat. And he's just got a group of players there that he really needs time to work out his best team, his best squad. And I think he's still working on that process. But the situation is, when you manage a club like Chelsea with the history they've got, certainly the recent history, you don't get time to make those decisions. You have to kind of hit the ground running. And he's not really done that. And he's had a fairly soft landing as well in terms of fixtures, Bournemouth and Luton. It's not really been the most demanding of starts. So I'd be a little bit concerned if I was Pochettino, because Chelsea has become a very difficult club to manage. I mean, it was difficult under Abramovich, but under Abramovich, you felt that the managers had the tools needed to succeed. If they failed, it was on they failed because they were given every chance to succeed. I think at Chelsea now, the manager has got almost too many tools to succeed, and maybe not the right tools. So I think Pochettino's trying to find his way through that. But, the performances haven't been great, and I think his big players haven't turned up. We know that there have been injuries, but he just needs a result. He needs to get a win from somewhere, because the longer it goes on, the harder it will get. And the Chelsea fans, I think that they could turn pretty quickly, because we know that he's got a great kind of association with Tottenham. Chelsea fans don't like Tottenham. If they for 1 minute feel that Pochettino is basically a Tottenham cast-off and it's not really working for them, then it'll be a lot harder for him. So nothing really looks good for Pochettino right now.
Yeah, it does not look good at all. I want to come back to the fan piece of it as well. I was at the game against Forest at the Bridge, and that was my first time there. And I know you hear about the Bridge all the time and how it's a little bit of maybe of a wine and cheese crowd, but that Forest crew was hyped up and they were loud, and there was no response. It felt like a dead atmosphere. And Stevie's now back with us. Stevie, in terms of Pochettino within regard to the fans, can he how does he animate that group? Because and obviously the performance in the field have not shown it, but that place felt dead before kickoff even started.
Yeah, I think he's still got plenty of money in the bank. I think the problem Chelsea has is nobody, and I'm talking about not just the fans, but the players and the manager. Nobody knows what they're going to give and what they're going to get. And so if you're a Chelsea fan, you're going to a game apprehensive. You're not going excited and ready to bust your lungs and get behind your team. You're worried. You're actually on the edge of your seat for the wrong reasons. I think that is what makes it such a strange atmosphere, because nobody knows what they're going to get. And so they find it hard to get behind the team. And also, the team's not doing anything to get them going either. So you've kind of got a stalemate with both the players and the fans, because they're not giving anything. Neither of them are giving anything. Fans are not giving support. Players are not giving any performances. So you've got a bit of a stalemate at Stamford Bridge.
Augie, you said before, and Stevie, I want to ask you this question following what Augie had said about some of their big players have yet to perform. They've tried to go young, whether it's Mudryk for $100 million, he's unproven, and there's other guys in the squad that they brought in for a lot of money. They're young players that have a lot of promise. Who are the big players in this team? Like, who is he looking at to rely on to perform, not just on the field, but in the locker room, as this is becoming a bit of a dysfunctional situation?
Well, that is such a hard question to answer. I mean, there's only 2 players come to my mind. One's Thiago Silva, who's older than me. And Enzo Fernandez, who is still learning his trades, regardless of the price tag. I mean, where else are we going? There's nowhere else to go. Even the captain, Reece James, is a kid who's still to reach his peak, and he's never fit. So I can't answer that question. I do not know. You look around this team, and I don't see where the strength is coming from. I just don't.
You know what a big problem is? Sorry, Dalen. I think a big problem, you mentioned the words you're looking at for leadership. The problem is that the best candidates were moved on before you arrived, or pretty much in terms of, Jorginho left in January, N'Golo Kante's gone, and Azpilicueta has gone now. All of those players probably wouldn't contribute on the pitch, but in the dressing room and around the club, they're massive because they've been around, they've been there, they've done it, and they've got the right character. And Steve mentions a few players. I mean, I'd chuck in Raheem Sterling in that bracket, but I don't think he's particularly a leader. But he's a guy that has been around the block a long time. He's one thing, so he should be a leader. He should be the guy that Pochettino says, "Look, Raheem, we need you to help lead this group of players." But haven't seen it yet. Raheem Sterling has always been a very good player, but I think he's very much I think selfish is the wrong word, but I think a player that's very much kind of on his own performance. I don't think he wants to lead, but the time has come that Sterling needs to lead. He's a senior player at Chelsea. He's got a big fee with a big reputation. He'll look around that dressing room and think, if I don't start leading, who is going to lead? So I think it's on Sterling a little bit to be the guy that finds something within his personality to become a leader, either by example or by deed. But I don't really see it just yet.
And that just tells you what a problem this is. When I agree with you that Raheem Sterling seems to be the only one, but really, Raheem Sterling, he's struggling. In my opinion, he's struggling for his own form. He scored a couple of goals against Luton, and all of a sudden, I hear people talking about how he started the season well. I mean, you and I could score against Luton. So, Raheem Sterling, if that's your answer, that tells you how long a season this is going to be for Chelsea. Because Raheem Sterling hasn't been consistent, and I don't imagine as a leader he would be particularly consistent. I think it would depend on what side of the bed he got up in the morning. So, yeah, I mean, that just tells you that we're scratching around. And the only one we can come up with, and I agree with you, Augie, that Sterling seems to be the only one, the most experienced, certainly. But he can't be the answer. If he's the answer, then that's why Chelsea's in trouble.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, guys, but that was a leading question because I have no clue, and I'm looking at the roster, so I thought I'd just toss that to you. Let's talk about their upcoming, because Augie, you also said their fixtures have not been tough to start the year. They have some teams that you imagine are going to be in a relegation battle, or that's Luton. Maybe Forest was going to be in there, but Forest has performed better throughout the course of the season so far. Upcoming, they have Villa, not easy, Fulham, Burnley, and then they go on a pretty rough run in terms of you got Arsenal, a Brentford team that's played well. You're going to go on the road to Spurs. You got City after that at home, then Newcastle, and you continue to roll through that as you see that on the full screen there. Augie, I put this to you. I mean, last year with Todd Burley coming in, bringing Graham Potter, it's supposed to be maybe a more stable situation. It's been anything but that, whether that be in how they've spent their money or how they've treated their managers. Is Poch going to find himself potentially on a hot seat if they don't find some results in these next 3 games and then through the early part of the year through December? Like, is this a potential that he may not make it through the season?
Well, there's always that potential at Chelsea. That's been the case for 20 years, but it seems to have accelerated under the new ownership, whereby, Potter, Tuchel, Lampard, they went through 3 last season, so anything's possible. I think it would be a reckless decision to get rid of Pochettino, but we know how football changes and how fans can get on the back of the manager and the owners, and things do change, especially if players begin to down tools, and we've seen that before at Chelsea as well. So Pochettino's got a lot of time on his side, but he is working at a club that things can turn very quickly. But in terms of those games ahead, there's not really a game there you could think, oh, that's a good game, because even the Carabao Cup tie against Brighton, which Brighton, it's not a team in League One or League Two. It's arguably the best team outside the Big Six. So, Chelsea could be out of the only cup they can win next week, because they're not going to win the Premier League, and the FA Cup tends to be won by the teams in the top 4 these days. So, if Chelsea lose to Brighton next week, they're out of a competition, then it also reduces the games to play. They're not playing European games. So all these millions of players that he's got aren't getting a game. So if the only games they've got between now and Christmas are Premier League games, he's got no chance to use his players or to get any kind of momentum, because he's playing once a week, maybe once every 10 days. So it really, really needs to win that Brighton game next week. But like I say, of all the teams that you could have picked to play in the Carabao Cup, Brighton at home is a really tough game. So yeah, it's a tricky one. And then Fulham, people look at Fulham. Fulham's a derby game for Chelsea. That can go anywhere as well. So there's no easy game coming ahead, but it's the Premier League, and Chelsea a club that should be able to win those games, you can't really pick a game they can win.
When you're in the position Chelsea's in, there's no such thing as an easy game. There just isn't one, and it all becomes psychological. If they're playing Arsenal away, then maybe there's a little bit of pressure off them because nobody's expecting anything. Whereas if you're at home to Luton, then all of a sudden there's a load of pressure on you because you can't not win this game. So we're now getting into the realms of psychology. Players are start stepping on the field, wondering what's going to happen, wondering if we're going to win, wondering are we going to get beat to Luton or are we going to raise a game and beat Man United away or whatever. So it really now is a psychological battle for Pochettino to try and get his players in a frame of mind where he can put them on the field and they're in a confident mood, they're prepared properly, they want to get after it, they want to be positive. These are all things that are not happening for Chelsea. So, listen, regardless of the opposition right now, Chelsea don't have an easy game.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's turn the conversation now to another team and another competition. Man United is going to take on Bayern at the Allianz here this afternoon in the Champions League. They just got thrashed by Brighton 3-1 in the Premier League. We can talk about Ten Hag and some of their issues. Before we get to that, though, let's hear from the former Spurs talisman, Harry Kane, obviously now leading the line for Bayern as they're about to play United today.
Obviously, you're facing Manchester United in the first game. Are you a bit more vocal in the team meetings ahead of this one? Are they tapping you up for information? And obviously, the manager knows all about it, having managed in England. But you sort of the mole in the camp, as it were, to be able to give them insider info.
Yeah, I think, of course, playing against an English side, I've had many experiences of that. So I think, maybe the players will lean on my experiences a bit. But teams change so much from year to year. There's a lot of obviously new players and a new way of playing. So, I think the focus will be on us as it is, every week to see how we can hurt them. And then, as always, I'll be trying to give little tips here and there to my players and the team to try and help us be successful on the night. It'll be a tough game. I know they're going through a little bit of a tough patch right now, but they're a really talented team, so we need to be switched on in every moment and try and perform well.
All right, that was Harry Kane. We're going to bring in Ryan O'Hanlon now. Wrote a great article you can see on ESPN FC on the website side of things, breaking down his power rankings for the Champions League teams. Ryan, before we kind of run through that, I know Augie's got to go, so I do want to ask you, Augie, Bayern is huge favorites, minus 220 to win this game at home. In terms of the actual overall odds to win the Champions League, their second favorites are plus 550 behind City at plus 200. Just your thoughts on this matchup, and can United somehow walk into Allianz and walk out with a point?
Look, no, I don't think they can. Look, the positive thing for United tonight is that it's match day one, and they're in a group where they should progress. I think Galatasaray and Copenhagen might give them difficulties away from home, but I think United can look at this as getting the worst game out of the way first. And they've got injury problems. I think Palestri will play tonight. I think the back four is going to be a bit changed because they've got injuries. I think Reguilon plays, but so they're not going there with the squad or the strength that they need. But I do think that this is even if United are at full strength, I think Bayern away is a game that is a tough one for anyone in the Champions League. The record there is incredible, so they're just going to have to take this from the chin, I think, and just hope to avoid a big defeat. Harry Kane's in great form, Bayern are flying, so I just think United are going to come out of this and maybe in a way focus on the game at Burnley on Saturday, because that right now is a bigger game because they need to get a result in the Premier League. So I think anything they get from tonight is a big result, but I just don't see how United can get it in the sense that they've got too many injuries, they've got too much form issues, and it's Bayern. There's probably no worse place they could go apart from the Etihad maybe, but I don't really see how United get anything out of this game tonight. And I think those power ranking numbers are right. I think United are miles away and Bayern are knocking on the door to Man City. Ironically, before I go, I think the one thing that I would stress this year, I think the one team most likely to stop City winning the Champions League this year is not even in the competition. I think Liverpool are the one team that could do it, and then the Europa League. So, get ready for City to win it again.
Yeah, City plus 200 seems like pretty good money. That's rare to say in the Champions League competition. When it hasn't even really started outside of one day. Augie, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time, man, and enjoy the matches today.
Cheers, guys.
All right, Ryan. Let's rip through those through your power rankings as you wrote on the ESPN website. Let's take us through what you see as you look through these teams and who's the most likely to win. I know City's one. Where does everybody else kind of fall in your mind?
Yeah, I think Mark made a good point. Like the field feels weaker this year than it has in years past. I think teams like Liverpool have missed out. I think some of the teams like Lazio, some of the bigger league teams that qualified this year are a little weaker than usual. And then like Benfica is going through a regime change. A lot of the mid-tier teams don't feel like they're as big a dark horses as they are in the past. So even like, to me, City, as you said, are clear favorites, maybe bigger favorites, at least seemingly bigger favorites than they've been in every year, despite, Kevin De Bruyne being injured, not really replacing Gundogan, kind of turning over a lot of the rosters. So that's my big takeaway, was like, it's Manchester City and then everyone else. But I think after City, it's probably Madrid and Bayern as the two most likely teams to take them down. And then I have another tier behind that, which is Arsenal, Barcelona, and PSG, which are like, I guess, three incredibly fragile clubs, I guess is the way that I would think about them. But after those first three, I don't think there are any other teams beyond them that have a bigger shout. So I think that kind of sums it up, right? That like, I feel like PSG, Barca, and Arsenal all have real shots to actually make a run this season.
Stevie, how do you see it in terms of the rankings, but also like, is it City and everybody else? And I do think that was an interesting notion Ryan posited there. It seems like the competition in terms of teams at the top is not as stiff as it has been in years past. Do you agree with that?
I think so, yeah. I think Man City are by far the clearest favourites. And I think after that, it's tough. It's tough to hang your hat on anybody, really. You can't. We're going to start talking about Real Madrid because it's the Champions League and it's Real Madrid. We're not talking about how they are on the field. We're not talking about they've lost Courtois and they've lost Militao. They haven't started the season badly as far as results, but they're not playing well. I mean, I just see a big group, and I include Arsenal and Barca and Bayern and all that. I think PSG have no chance of winning the Champions League. They're struggling in the French league right now. Never mind winning the Champions League. It almost seems like if Mbappe doesn't fancy it, then where's the performances or the goals coming from? So yeah, I think City way ahead of everybody, and I think you lump a load of them in together. Even Bayern, Tuchel's talking at the weekend again about, against Leverkusen, they completely dominated for 20 minutes and then disappeared for the next 20 minutes. I mean, that's something that's been happening last season under Tuchel, and it's happening again this season. I don't think they're particularly consistent defensively. Upamecano is struggling. And Ulrich in goal is not anybody's pick to be the goalkeeper. So I think you can go after City. You can go right through all these teams and pick problems. I'd probably think one of the strongest contenders might be Arsenal, because the other sides I see a lot of problems.
Stevie, let's stay on that real quick with experience, because Bayern hasn't lost in a group stage game since like 1998. It's ridiculous how dominant they've been in terms of group stage games, but they're always in this competition and they're always getting to at least the quarterfinals, it seems. Right. Arsenal has not been in it in 6 years. They still have a young team. A lot of these guys have not played, and Jorginho can come off the bench. They have guys that have played in Champions League games and had success, but by and large, the core of that team has not. How much, if at all, does experience in these European nights matter?
It does. I mean, you've only got to look at Real Madrid to tell you the experience matters. I just find it hard. I kind of always tend to look at it on paper, look at it in black and white. And when I look at it like that, I'm not taking into account things like experience. I just kind of look at where the holes might be, and I just see a lot of holes in sides like Bayern and PSG. Whereas in Arsenal, I don't see any huge holes in Arsenal. I think defensively they're pretty solid. They're strong in the middle of the park and they can score goals. That's why I'm kind of, if I'm going to hang my hat on anybody past City, that's why I'm veering towards Arsenal. As I said, I can see problems at Bayern, Barcelona. Again, I'm not entirely sure about them defensively this year. So yeah, I'm very negative right now, I guess you could say.
Well, you're positive on City and plus 200. So that's, like a lot of us are, which is sometimes that's concerning when everybody's on one side and Arsenal. But we're going to come back to something that maybe Arteta's creating a little bit of an issue with the goalkeeper situation. We'll come back to that in a minute. Last thing on Champions League, though, Ryan, in terms of, because in years past, whether it be Leipzig getting to a semifinal, I don't think anybody had the Milan derby being one of the semifinals last year.
Yeah.
Do you see anybody that, based on the groups and how they could lay out in terms of a potential bracketing situation, anybody seem like a dark horse? I know you said not to win it, but to make a deeper run that we tend to see in the last couple of years.
Yeah, like to try to bring some positivity to this conversation. We haven't talked about any of the Italian teams, and I think there's early signs that maybe Serie A is a little bit stronger than it's been in years past. I mean, even last year, Inter, they had a very easy draw to get to the final, but they played quite well, I thought, in the final, and easily could have tied against City, if not won the game. And they've been flying this year. Napoli lost their coach, obviously lost Kim-Min-jae to Bayern Munich, but they still have Kvaratskhelia and Osimhen up top. I think they'll still be dangerous. And even honestly, yesterday, like Milan, after losing 5-1 to Inter, they drew at Newcastle, but they totally dominated the game to like an absurd degree where they could have won by multiple goals. So I don't know if it's a cop-out to say one of the Serie A teams I think will make a deep run, one of those three. I mean, even Lazio played okay against Atletico, and I wasn't fancying them. So I think Serie A is the one league that maybe feels like it's on kind of a little bit of an upswing, while all the other leagues are maybe stagnating around on a new cycle.
Okay, we'll take a Serie A lean. That's helpful. Before we let you go, Ryan, real quick, with the two big games, United on the road at Bayern, Arsenal hosting PSV Eindhoven. Are both those teams, the Gunners and the Germans, walking away with 3 points?
Part of me feels like every time we're talking about Man U being in crisis, they win, and then when we're talking about them like challenging for the title, they end up winning. But I just, we've seen enough English teams go into Allianz and get absolutely destroyed. So I don't feel good about Man U getting anything out of today's game. And I think if Arsenal are going to challenge, like Stevie said, I think this is the kind of game that you make easy work of.
Good stuff. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you, man. And you can check out his article on ESPN.com. All right, Stevie, let's get back into some of the Arsenal situation this past weekend. David Raya gets the start. They win the game, and that's the most important part. They walk away 3 points, but Raya starts in goal over Aaron Ramsdale. We'll know in probably about 2 hours who's actually starting this Champions League game as they take on Eindhoven. He had a lot to say, Arteta did, about why he made this decision, and went back to last year and basically said, if I had the guts, I would have changed goalies mid-game, which literally has never happened outside of like penalty shootout situations and cup competitions and tournaments. What do you make of this? Is this unnecessary, or is this his first step into making Raya the number one keeper? Like, why do this, and how does this play in the locker room?
Well, this situation 100% is going to test his man management skills. Because if I'm Aaron Ramsdale, I've had a good season, we're challenging for the Premier League, I'm clearly the number one goalie, and all of a sudden there's a spanner thrown in the works by Arteta signing Raya, and then not coming out and saying I'm his number one. So Arteta and Ramsdale have to have had conversations about this, because Aaron Ramsdale, no question, at the start of the season will be thinking, what's going to happen here? And the only way he's not thinking that is if Arteta has sat him down and explained the whole thing to him. And if Arteta can get these two goalkeepers to understand that they're both going to be playing, then it'll somewhat work. But if he has just thrown them to the lions and said, okay, best man wins, then you're going to create turmoil in their heads. So he has to have sat them down and explained what he's thinking. I mean, again, the nonsense about substituting a goal in the 85th minute or something, I don't get that at all. You're asking for trouble. There are so many, you're affecting all kinds of stuff. You're affecting the back four. Why would you affect the back four and the goalkeeper? I mean, it makes no sense to me. The fact is, he's got two great goalkeepers, and if he decides to do it and do something crazy like that, he might get away with it because they're good goalkeepers. But I just don't see how. I don't see how it actually works. I think the theory's great. The theory's fantastic, but theory is one thing, and practical and actual are a completely different other thing. So, listen, I expect Ramsdale to start. I expect these two to be flip-flopping. I don't think that's a good idea. I wouldn't do it as a coach. I would have a number one, and I'd have a guy backing him up and keeping him on his toes. But Arteta's a different animal to most coaches and most managers, and he's going to do it the way he sees fit, the way he thinks is the right way to do it. Just unfortunately, right now he's kind of on an island, because I haven't heard anybody else on the planet who thinks this is a good idea.
Yeah, this is from American sports perspective. We always say from a quarterback in American football, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. Like that's not a good thing. You got to have one guy. You got to have the guy. We've never really seen this. Have you seen this work on any level where you're actually flip-flopping goalies?
No. I can only go back to before I played. Before, I'm saying, when England had two world-class goalies, a guy called Peter Shilton and a guy called Ray Clemens, and they both ended up with 60-odd to 70-odd caps each because they just kept flip-flopping. Now, when you've got two world-class goalies, you can get away with it, but at the same time, you're now affecting your back four. You're certainly affecting your two centre-backs, because now they're playing one game with one goalie, and then when the other goalie comes in, you've got to adjust to what he prefers, what his best qualities are. So I don't think it doesn't settle any team when you're constantly making changes, regardless of the position. But certainly, if you're flip-flopping goalkeepers, I think that's way bigger than what happens with outfield players.
Yeah, he tried to liken it to outfield players, but I think that's a force that nobody really agrees with. As you said, he's on an island right now, and he's done this in arguably the biggest week of their season. They haven't been in a Champions League in 6 years. So you're going to come back to the Champions League with Eindhoven midweek. You have the North London derby coming up at the weekend. And don't forget, folks, on October 8th, which is a couple weeks away, they play City. So like this is like a huge part of the season right now where this is coming up. And needless to say, at a very interesting time. We'll see what happens when they play Eindhoven in a little bit.
You know, and again, when you said this, they're playing City soon, there's no question that whoever plays against City, the other one's going to be thinking, well, he's picked him for this game, so that means he must think he's the best. I mean, you're just causing confusion and angst to something that you don't need. Again, just another reason why I don't think it works.
Yeah. All right. Let's we'll find out what happens in that game a little bit later, about 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. Those games kick off. All right. In terms of it's September, but we still have to talk about transfers because that's what we do apparently. Alphonso Davies potentially going from Bayern to Real Madrid, one giant to another giant. The young Canadian. What would you make of this move? Do you think that fits? Obviously, he's an incredibly talented young player.
Yeah, I think the idea of the whole thing makes sense. He's a great player. And so, yeah, if I'm Real Madrid, I would like to have Alphonso Davies in my team. Now, the two problems are, one, does he want to leave Bayern? But the other problem is they've just signed Fran Garcia, who has started the season pretty well for Real Madrid. So I don't see how this... I just don't see how this happens. I don't see it. I'm not so sure he wants to leave Bayern. Listen, if you're going to leave Bayern, there's no better place to go than Real Madrid, I guess. But yeah, for me, I don't see how this happens, and I'm not so sure it works.
Yeah, it's not a bad option to have, but obviously the fee involved for one of the best young outside backs in the world would be pretty hefty, I'd imagine. Yeah. Scott McTominay, obviously playing for United. We'll see if he starts in this game coming up this weekend. Much maligned by United fans and a lot of Premier League viewers. He plays much better when he's wearing the international jersey. There's some rumors that he may go to Bayern. Is this something is he the quality of player that Bayern would want and need in the middle of the park for that?
I don't want to be harsh on McTominay, but yeah. I mean, there's a reason why he's not playing for Manchester United. And in the scheme of things, Manchester United right now, in terms of what they have on the field, is way below the level of Bayern Munich. And Scott McTominay, although he played at the weekend, hasn't been getting a game for Manchester United. So the whole thing doesn't really add up. You got a player who isn't good enough for Manchester United, who right now are at a level below Bayern Munich, and a player who can get a team for a team that are level below Bayern Munich, but Bayern Munich want him. It really doesn't add up to me, unless they're looking for a body and he's cheap. That's kind of where I'm going for it to happen. So no, again, a bit like the last one, I just don't see how this happens at all.
Yeah, the difference with me, the last one, obviously Davies is pure quality and pure class and going from one giant to another. And McTominay going to Bayern, that was head scratching to me. Like, what?
Yeah,
You can see people can see something different in different players, but there's sometimes a quality of a player with that team that just doesn't make sense, and I just don't see it there. All right, we're gonna wrap up the show here. Before we do that, though, I do want to ask you this because we talked about Poch at the top of the show. We're obviously kind of touching on United's issues, to say the least, as they just got blasted by Brighton 3-1. They've got issues off the pitch, issues in the boardroom, issues on the pitch for Ten Hag. He's under pressure. Pochettino's under pressure. Poch just took the job, though, obviously, this year. Between the two of them, who's going to get the sack first? If somebody's going to get sacked, who's going first?
I knew you were going to ask me that. That's a tough one. I would have to say Ten Hag, because I would like to think that Todd Bowley and his cronies have eventually figured out that the biggest problem is what's running on the field, not what's coaching it off the field. You know, you've gone through Potter, you've gone through Lampard, you've gone through Tuchel, you've now got Poch, and nothing's really changed an awful lot between the lot of them. So I think eventually you kind of figure out that the problem is not the coach. Whereas Ten Hag, everything seems to be piling up, and it just might be a get out for the Glazers to sack him if the team continues to struggle the way they did against Brighton and gets completely outplayed by teams like Brighton. So yeah, I'm going to go with Ten Hag. I think Ten Hag is more likely to get the sack than Poch. Mainly because of the reasons I gave you with Pochettino. So yeah, I'm going to go with Ten Hag. I guess a lot of the time as well, owners will look at what's going on off the field and discipline-wise. And he's already come out and said that one of the problems they asked him to solve was the disciplinary problems they had at the club. And the fact that nearly 2 years in, the disciplinary problems are probably worse than when he walked through the door. So I think if you add that to struggling on the field, again, that's why I think Ten Hag may go, or certainly would go before Pochettino.
We'll find out. We'll see what they look like in a couple hours here against Bayern at the Allianz. That could only add more pressure if they get blasted like they did against Brighton at the weekend, although that was at Old Trafford. Stevie, thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for joining us, folks, watching the ESPN FC YouTube show. Get it Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, noon Eastern, 5 GMT. Thanks, guys.